It's an act to restore Ontario's competitiveness, but some say it actually puts Ontario's workers at risk. I'm Christina Howard, and Bill 66 is a government omnibus bill. It covers everything from childcare to long-term care, from transit and transportation to labor, and it's loosening the governmental restrictions on the Employment Standards Act.
What Bill 66 does is it lessens the protections that workers have in the workplace.
Dina Ladd has lots of experience dealing with exploited workers and says changes to overtime rules are going to open the door to potential abuses. Right now, if a boss needs an employee to work more than 48 hours in a week, both have to sign an agreement and they have to get a permit from the Ministry of Labour. This bill eliminates that.
For many of the workers that we work with, if a boss hands them an agreement and says, you have to work 60 hours of work this week or even more, most people, if they want to keep their jobs, they will sign it.
Laurie Scott, Ontario's Minister of Labour, disagrees.
What we've found, and what's already enacted, is that it's a mutually agreed. So the worker has to agree and the employer has to agree. So both of them mutually agree to over the 48 hours, and what there was just basically a rubber stamp from the Ministry of Labour on something that was already agreed upon by both parties.
But that rubber stamp goes a long way towards enforcement.
The permits at the end of the day will help us at least have some oversight as to which employers are asking workers to not get paid overtime on a weekly basis or work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And that is critically important for inspections. We need to know which employers are making workers actually work these kinds of hours, if it's happening in just a busy period, or if they're actually making workers work these types of hours for months and months on end, which really defeats the purpose of employment standards.
And employment standards? Those rules will no longer need to be posted.
There's a component of this bill which allows employers to no longer post their rights of employees in the workplace. And, they talk a lot about red tape. This actually requires a little piece of Scotch tape and a poster.
People get information from electronic sources now, more so. So they still have to be provided by the employers.
And complex new rules about averaging overtime over the span of several weeks could mean some employees are working 60 or even 70-hour weeks without overtime pay.
We feel strongly that there should be no loopholes in the legislation which allows an employer to not pay someone who is working overtime.
Coming up, why the Ontario government is proposing to eliminate its oversight of toxins in the workplace. It's called the Toxins Reductions Act, and chances are you haven't heard of it. And if Bill 66 passes in its current form, well, it won't even exist in a few years. I'm Christina Howard, and buried in this government omnibus bill is the elimination of what some are calling an important environmental protection, namely reducing the creation and the use of toxic substances and making sure Ontarians know exactly where they are.
Since when did reducing toxic pollution, which directly affects public health, since when did that become red tape? It makes no sense to me why the government would do that.
Bill 66 would revoke the Toxins Reductions Act, which compels companies to reduce the creation and use of toxins, to track their progress and be inspected by provincial officers.
The federal government already regulates through their Chemical Management Act the exact same toxins. This is good for business because business having to do something twice, that's the same thing, is inefficient for them.
But Miriam Diamond, who consulted on the Toxins Reductions Act and is involved in federal regulation, says they don't cover the same ground.
The Provincial Toxics Reduction Act does not duplicate the federal chemical management plan. The provincial legislation provides flexibility and incentive for industries to reduce their use of toxic substances. The federal plan looks on a chemical-by-chemical basis to determine whether there's a risk associated with the use of specific chemicals.
Bill 66 in general is moving, I think, too rapidly in terms of changing regulations. The regulations are there to protect people. Reducing regulations was part of the cause of Walkerton.
What a lot of people don't realize is Ontario actually has more higher release of toxic emissions than most jurisdictions in North America. So in some respects, we should be strengthening the Act, not getting rid of the Act. So to take away reporting requirements, to take away your right as a citizen to know what pollution is happening in your community is simply wrong.
Industries under the Act have to table their chemical use plans with the province. That's open information. It allows the community to understand both the types of toxics that are used, where they're used. It's community right to know.
That won't be happening if the bill passes in its current form. Still, Phillips says the federal government's regulations are robust enough to keep Ontarians safe.
We have confidence in the federal government when it comes to many things, and we have confidence in them here.
For some reason, Doug Ford thinks that it's okay just to leave it up to Justin Trudeau. The fact of the matter is that the Liberals never made it very strong, but the PCs have decided to throw it all out.
I'm going to be pushing back on Bill 66 because your health, our environment is not red tape.
Now, Bill 66 is currently being debated in the legislature, but with a majority government, big changes aren't expected.